I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is a Fear and Greed extended interview. All the other good bits we couldn't fit into the daily podcast. If you're looking for the daily episode of Fear and Greed, check the podcast playlist. Otherwise, enjoy the interview. There's been plenty of action in the electronic payments sector lately. Think the enormous growth of Afterpay and Zip. But there are plenty of other players that have been around long enough to become household names. I'm talking in particular about BPAY. BPAY was created more than 20 years ago by the big four banks to drive innovation in payments, take some of the more straightforward bill payments out of the bank branches, and also to prevent credit card companies from dominating the sector. During the past few years, BPAY has continued to evolve as a company, and these days, the group manages more than 1.5 million BPAY transactions a day, and more than 2 million OSCO payments a day. If you haven't used OSCO, it's an answer to one of the main complaints about modern banking, the 3-day delay when transferring money to another person's account. BPAY CEO John Banfield is my guest this morning. John, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you very much, Sean. Delighted to be here.
Can you just give us a thumbnail sketch of BPAY and where it came from and why the banks got together and kind of how it's evolved, please?
Well, I think as you described in your intro, it was an innovation at the time where collectively the banks got together to find a way of being able to offer an alternative payment mechanism for consumers and small businesses to pay bills rather than having to go directly into a utility or a telecom to pay your bill. For consumers to have different choice rather than setting up a direct debit where consumers didn't want to give their bank account details to a utility to host, or in fact to use a credit card where some of those utilities back then weren't accepting credit cards per se.
It's evolved enormously in the last 20 years. Before we get into that, I did a transfer in my bank account only in the last 10 minutes and OSCO came up, which means that immediately it's been transferred to the person I was sending it to almost instantaneously. Tell us about OSCO.
Well, OSCO is a person-to-person payment. We call P2P. It is also government-to-person. It can be person-to-business. So it has many different variations, but largely person-to-person to enable you to be able to pay someone else in real time, no matter where they bank. So I think that's the flexibility to be able to then describe what that payment may be for. So it might be that you've just paid for someone's lunch, Sean, and you are able to, or the person that you've obviously taken to lunch can pay for half their meal and actually give a description as to what the payment is for, whether it's emojis, whether it's 280 characters of information. And I think that's just terrific.
Okay, now I'm looking for a 101 on payments system infrastructure here because there seem to be a lot of options around. So there's BPAY and EFTPOS. We talk about the new payments platform. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, the new payments platform is the real-time rails of which OSCO sits as an overlay service on top of. So think about the rails as the infrastructure and think about services that go onto that infrastructure, such as OSCO, to provide ultimate services out to consumers. EFTPOS sit on a completely different rails and for a specific purpose of typically what I would call point of sale purchases, as opposed to OSCO, which again is person to person.
So the new payments platform is something that has come out of regulators, is that right? Or is it a private sector investment to create the infrastructure, for want of a better word?
It's an industry investment that has a number of different shareholders, including the 4 major banks and, of course, the Reserve Bank of Australia. And this is all about getting up to innovate and be a part of the times. You know, there are different real-time systems around the world, of which I know Australia looked heavily at those other markets and have really created, I think, a platform today that is certainly second to none in terms of what services it does provide and it will provide in the future.
Stay with me, John. We'll be back in a moment. My guest this morning is CEO of BPAY, John Banfield. So all these new players and the new payments platform provides the infrastructure for OSCO. EFTPOS you mentioned, there's Apple Pay, Google, Tencent, Alibaba, they're all entering the space. Then you've got the older players like MasterCard and Visa. What is it that has provided this impetus to get so many players in the market? Is it just technology or has there been legislative change as well?
I think it's largely the technology movement And those are big players wanting to control and at least have direct contact with the ultimate consumer. What you've got to understand too, that these players, the offerings that are out there today are quite different. You've got credit cards where they are typically a point of sale transaction or could be an e-commerce transaction. A BPAY transaction or an OSCO transaction occurs safely within your internet banking, as opposed to typically being an app. And there are therefore different consumers that have different mindsets around the safety and security of a transaction. Some may prefer to be able to have control of their payments within their internet banking environment. Others are freely using, credit cards and the security around credit cards versus those that want to use their own money as in an FPOS transaction, say at point of sale. So again, I would say different courses for different consumers.
Okay, so as a consumer, I should really work out what I'm comfortable with and then use that particular payment system.
Absolutely, Sean. And I would say that if you look today at someone that pays a bill, you will get some consumers today that are happy to actually give their BSB an account number to a utility to hold and draw down a direct debit every month, which is typically a set and forget. You will get some consumers that are quite happy to pay via credit card and potentially pay a surcharge for doing so. And then you will get a large portion of the consumer base that will pay by BPAY and be in control of their money and control of the payment that they make and knowing that it's secure within their internet banking environment when doing so.
A very competitive market you're working in.
It is incredibly competitive. However, I believe it's all about innovating and it's all about choice for the consumer. And I believe that the consumer makes the right choice for their specific needs.
The last couple of years, you have innovated quite a bit, or BPAY certainly has. And the thing about BPAY is I think everyone trusts it. At the end of the day, money is all about trust. And I've never met anyone who doesn't think BPAY is a great service. So there's a great trust factor, which is where you're starting from. But tell us about where you're innovating at the moment.
Well, we're innovating across three pillars of our strategy. One is within our existing scheme where we offer BPAY and OSCO today. The second pillar is about innovating outside of our scheme where, in fact, banks can choose whether or not they participate. And an example of that would be the creation of a potential fraud tool that enables the identification and the verification of BSB and account number rather than potentially fraudsters adapting or editing those and then payments going to the wrong BSB and account number. So we've got ways of being able to, I believe, commercialise a proposition to attack fraud.
Beyond BPAY, you mean?
This is within BPAY, but beyond what I would typically call a BPAY or an OSCO transaction or a payment. It's closely linked to payments, but not a payment. The third area for us is about new opportunities, to incubate opportunities, again, within the industry, but that are not necessarily payment related. And I'm under a non-disclosure agreement. However, I can talk more broadly about the fact that we are working on a proof of concept for a national identity proposition. And that proposition is something that we believe will solve specific use cases for millions of Australians, millions of individuals, and also potentially banks.
Solving for cyber crime effectively, identity theft, those sorts of things.
Well, solving also for, think about the way in which you have to go into a phone company and apply for a new phone plan, as an example, or the way in which you go into a bank to apply for a loan or a new bank account. There is a process that you go through that is quite a lengthy process. If we're able to take that process from, say, 45 minutes to potentially a day or 2 or 3 days to validate who you are, down to minutes, that is a massive cost saving for the business. And it's a huge cost saving in time and efficiency for those that want to, in fact, go through that process to get a loan.
To have some sort of national standard like that, or national identification, would be fantastic. And, that's clearly going on in the background, which is great. There are a bunch of payment systems, and I was reading something that Reserve Bank Governor Phil Lowe said about 12 months ago, sort of hinting that there was almost too many of them. Is it likely that you will end up seeing some of these payments structured groups working closer together?
I think so, Sean. If you look at a good example of that is FPOS acquired Beam just recently. So I think we will see some form of coordination, consolidation at some point. But I think any time that you will see that, you want to make sure that it makes absolute sense for those involved. You want to make sure that it makes absolute sense for the end user in terms of being able to create efficiencies and innovations for the future to ensure that you've got a really competitive proposition that you can grow and a competitive proposition that you can continue to innovate on.
Well, according to the Financial Review Boss magazine, BPAY is one of the most innovative companies in the world. In fact, for the last 2 years, you've made the list of most innovative companies in Australia. How do you keep innovating in a sector where everyone else is moving so quickly?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I believe that it starts with the culture of the company. The culture of the company has allowed us to create, to be innovative, to empower our people to be able to really open their minds and to always step forward. And I think that enables us to be able to create and focus on things that we feel really passionate about innovating. We've created APIs more recently that have enabled us to be able to attract customers that we felt typically were not customers that we would have as customers or as members of the scheme. We've got customers today in the buy now, pay later area where they are connecting through to us on our APIs. And that would have never happened if we didn't innovate specifically around the APIs that we have.
So how do you create that culture? I mean, you were ranked in the top 5 best places to work as well. It's been quite a year. How do you create that culture?
Well, nothing but hard work. However, it's not one thing, Sean. It's a number of things. The fact that we've worked really hard on employee engagement, on our leadership, on listening to our people, to be able to formulate values in the company that everyone absolutely believe in. They live and breathe every single day. Those values are connected to the way in which we behave, the way in which we reward and recognize our people, and they all contribute to our culture. Our culture is not a destination, it's a moving journey. Even through COVID, we have taken elements of what is working through COVID, through this pandemic, to be able to continue to focus on how we work to tweak our culture to ensure that it really is still meaningful for everyone in the organisation and it drives the right results. Our engagement levels the last 4 or 5 years have gone from 59% up to 92, 93%. And I couldn't be more proud about how we've been able to achieve that as an organisation. And as a result, what awards and what financial performance comes with that.
Yeah, all businesses are people businesses, I suppose.
100%. There's probably a saying that I think it may have come from Richard Branson that happy employees equals happy customers equals happy shareholders. And it's that virtuous circle that really works for us.
John, thanks for talking to Fear and Greed.
You're welcome. Thanks again, Sean.
That was BPAY Chief Executive John Banfield.